In the Dragon Ball franchise, the concept of death has long been considered something that doesn't really matter, because in the series, the titular items of the Dragon Balls can resurrect people from death, whether or not a single person has been dead for many years or an entire planet has been wiped out. These magical spheres have the power to undo the finality of death. However, what if this concept was turned on its head? What if there was a sort of Blackest Night scenario where the dead rose from the graves and those who have been resurrected return to take out our heroes? Well, in this video, we're going to break down that possibility. Make sure to subscribe to this channel and enable notifications so you can see all of my content right away when it comes out. Okay guys, so today we're going to be talking about this possible scenario in which perhaps Dragon Ball can use death as an actual storytelling tool. You know, for long it's been seeming like something that really has no impact on the series proper except for like the History of Trunks timeline. However, there is a possibility that it still could become something that is a major deal in the future. And joining me today to discuss this topic is someone you've seen on my videos in the past, and his name is...
Alrighty guys, it is Kwame here today, also known as Detective Q, and I'm back for another video with Mike from Laughingstock Media. How's it going?
Alright, Kwame, so what do you think about this idea that perhaps Dragon Ball can take this long-running concept of death, which has seemingly not really mattered, and make it matter again, and maybe make death itself become an ultimate threat in the franchise proper?
Well, the funny thing about this, Mike, is I think that the series has kind of played with this idea before several times when you're talking about zombie villains or villains who have come back numerous times, where you could look at movies like, you know, Fusion Reborn, where like all of the villains were coming back, and then you could look at GT when they were like harassing, you know, Earth once again. But if I were to compare this to something more recent in Dragon Ball Super, I'd have to be the training sequence between Goku and Krillin, and this would be the sequence in which Krillin needed to regain his confidence after, you know, he was going up against all of the villains of the past, including Bulma, and I think that was the funny part.
Yeah.
Because it's like, in Krillin's figment of imagination, he's afraid of Bulma of all characters. And I think that it's something that can always be reused because there's so many classic Dragon Ball villains that if you ever needed to kind of pop them back up from the dead and bring them back, you can do it. And I mean, look at Frieza, for crying out loud. He's dead, but yet he's fighting in the Tournament of Power.
Yeah, absolutely. And the whole event that really inspired this topic is the Blackest Night event in DC, in which many of our heroes and even villains who have died in the past were brought back as Black Lanterns, you know, basically super-powered zombie villains who were taking on the few heroes who were never killed or resurrected, because even those who were resurrected were infected by this evil. And I think that's one of the cool concepts they can go with in Super, because so many of our heroes have been resurrected in the past or have died in the past, and I think it would be cool if maybe going with this whole idea of balance in Dragon Ball Super. You know, the gods of destruction destroy, the gods of creation create. However, perhaps there is some sort of god of death, or there is some sort of balance that is kept with the death concept itself, and once too many people come back from the dead, it starts to throw everything out of balance, and some sort of calamity has to happen to set everything correctly. And that would also tie in to the concept that the old Kai said in Dragon Ball Z in the Buu Saga, where he said abusing the Dragon Balls can have consequences. Now, Kwame, as we know, in Dragon Ball GT, this brought about the Shadow Dragon Saga, in which the Shadow Dragons literally came out of the Dragon Balls itself. Well, maybe it would be interesting if, in this case, in Super, they go to make a wish to bring people back, and instead, it brings the dead back as, like, zombies, or, like, some sort of horrible thing happens that actually turns that wish on its head.
Yeah, I think that could be really interesting too. However, I think the problem with this concept is really dealing with power scaling, and, Dragon Ball's universe kind of touched on this with, possessing villains of the past and then using them as, tools. But I think the interesting thing here is dealing with weaker characters. Like, how do you make a character like, let's say, Staff Officer Black, a threatening villain by modern Dragon Ball standards? I mean, with the exception of Cell, who might have been doing magical training in a cocoon in hell like Frieza might have, I can't really think of villains that would have posed a threat to the biggest characters. However, as Dragon Ball Super has kind of been going in its own direction, you can always kind of make Goku and Vegeta fight the more threatening ones and then make the weaker guys fight the weaker ones. That's the only way to kind of make it balanced.
Yeah, and I think that would actually be really cool, because it's always nice when we get to see the smaller Z fighters actually fighting someone who's on their level, and they get to have their own good fights, even if they aren't necessarily influencing the very ending of the series or the very ending of the saga. And it would be cool to see our heroes like Goku, Vegeta, and maybe even someone like Gohan being able to take on a really powerful threat. And I think that, there is a possibility that they could make them even more powerful by using an external source of power. So in Blackest Night, the person who was leading the Black Lanterns was named Necron, and his lantern had this super powerful villain from the past called the Anti-Monitor inside of it, who was capable of wiping out entire universes and was pretty much the biggest threat in DC for a period of time. So it would be interesting if somehow there was an external force making these villains even stronger, so that, now they can actually fight our heroes and actually put up some sort of a threat. Plus, if they're zombies, maybe they can just keep getting back up even after you blast them through the head. Krillin can use the Kienzan, chop off some zombie heads, and they just pick them back up and put them on their shoulders, I think that'd be pretty funny. But if you were to have this idea as your own, if you were in control of this, what would you do, and what do you think the best way of going about doing this would be? Because, I know we've both seen all of these examples. Most of the times in Dragon Ball, they just have a big horde of villains flying at people, and they pretty much get beaten like fodder. So would you handle that a little bit differently in this case?
I think the best way to put this to me, Mike, is I would probably do something similar to Xenoverse, where it would not necessarily be time travel, but in the sense where the black magic is actually empowering them and making them do these things. Because the thing is, the problem with Dragon Ball villains, and why I always feel like Xenoverse did what was right with them, is that villains kind of have their own ego and their own motives, right? Yeah. So how do I make a character like BoJack, he's a movie character, but how could I make a character like BoJack fight alongside Cell? They're both evil guys. And I thought that was always so funny in Fusion Reborn, how BoJack was taking orders from Frieza, even though in theory BoJack, at least at that time, should have been way stronger than what Frieza was, unless Frieza magically got stronger. So I think that you have to have some type of alignment goal to make these zombie villains follow some kind of common path. And I think the way it worked in the original video game of A Plan to Eradicate the Saiyans is all of the villains had some type of hatred towards the Saiyans, with Lord Slug, Frieza, and Cooler, and all those. So I think that kind of aligned their Ghost Warriors to be doing something similar with each other. So I think there has to be kind of a common goal for them to do that.
Yeah, either that or basically, somehow their minds are removed and they just basically become mindless drones or zombies. But again, would we just want to see our heroes fight a bunch of mindless monsters, or would we like to see them fight people that have their own motivations? It's really fun watching Frieza in the Tournament of Power, just because we know that his motivations and what he wants is pretty much counter to what our main characters and protagonists want, because Frieza, even though he's serving as a protagonist right now, is still mostly an antagonist, and he wants his own evil things to happen. So it might be cool, lower villains are just going along with the plan, but maybe they have their own plans of overthrowing those in power. That's one of the things I've always liked about seeing seeing, villains team up in other forms of media as well, because they always have their own ideas, but they have a common ground that they can actually use to fight against our heroes. So overall, this has been a fun topic I wanted to discuss, a possibility of taking something that seems like it's kind of been done away with death, something that, overall has not really seemed like it mattered that much until right now in Super with Erasure, and turning it into some sort of villain on its own. Let us know your own thoughts down below in the comments, and of course check out Detective Q in the end card and description, and as I always say, stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, they could never bring me back from the dead, because they could never kill me in the first place. My muscular heart never stops beating.